Hi there, welcome to On the Edge. I'm your host, Matthew Wexler, and you are watching Edge Media Network, your go-to source for LGBTQ plus news and entertainment. The weather is starting to change across much of the country. It's getting cooler outside. We're starting to snuggle a little bit more, and maybe, just maybe, someone's going to put a ring on it. Or maybe you're going to put a ring on someone else. If and when you do, there is one and only one person you should call. That is Mr. Jason Mitchell Kahn. The full-service wedding planner specializes in creating, hopefully, once-in-a-lifetime experiences and has earned a highly regarded reputation in the LGBTQ plus community. We are talking weddings today on The Edge. Let's take a look at some of his most spectacular affairs. Wow, each one of those events looks so incredibly spectacular and so unique. If you have been dreaming of your own big day, you probably have a lot of questions. Fortunately, we are live, so drop them in the chat, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We will do our best to have Jason answer them. Without further ado, let's bring him on. Wedding planner extraordinaire, Jason Mitchell Kahn.
Hi, Matthew.
Hi, it's so great to see you, at least virtually.
It's great to see you virtually as well.
I'm sure you're probably recovering from another busy weekend of weddings, I imagine. How many weddings is there a typical wedding weekend? I don't know. Are we in high wedding season? I have no idea.
We are in like turbo wedding season. I mean, fall is always busy no matter the region. And this fall of 2021 was like exponentially greater than anything I've ever experienced because it was really the height of all the rescheduled weddings.
Of course.
Yeah.
Everyone's playing catch up. That totally makes sense.
So to answer your question, this past weekend, I did 3 weddings.
Oh my gosh. All in your base. Well, you're sort of bi-coastal between New York and the West Coast, right? Were the weddings destination weddings or were they all here in New York? Where were you?
Well, they were in New York, but 2 were in Hudson Valley. And then 1 was back in New York City on Sunday night.
All right. Well, we're going to get to all of it. I'm just stressed thinking about it. Like you've been in event planning and the event industry for a long time. We've known each other through several different professional iterations for both of us. And so I'm curious how you shifted to the wedding planning business.
Sure. Yes, you've known me all this time to see how it evolved. But I started as somebody who moved to New York, wanting to be in theater as a writer and writing plays. And like so many artists in New York, my side jobs were in hospitality, starting as a restaurant server. And eventually I was at a venue where I started as a server, and then I moved into their events department and I started doing what's known as events captaining, which is sort of a catering term, and then eventually event management. And it was at a venue that we did all types of events. It was a members club downtown. It was the Soho House. And I did things that we put on for our members, like Halloween parties and New Year's parties and, movie festivals, and then stuff that our members would pay to book our spaces and do, which was everything from birthday parties and baby showers and weddings. And that's really where it started for me, was when our members came to start booking their weddings at the Soho House. It was really the first type of event that I was involved in that I felt a real connection to doing, from a place of always still wanting to be a writer. And I really saw weddings as a place that you could tell people's story through the events that we were producing. And I just felt this amazing amount of connective tissue to it. So I felt very, very drawn to it.
Yeah, and, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's so much like putting on a show in the best way, which is why I feel very at home doing it. And that's really where it began.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you're an author as well. You wrote a book called Getting Groomed, and it came out, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think just in terms of the timeline of things, it did come out before sort of your entry into being a full service wedding company. And the language has changed a lot around our LGBTQ community. This particular title, Getting Groomed, I'm assuming was targeting, same-sex couples and gay men. I'm just curious how your perspective has shifted over the year as the larger dialogue has shifted as well.
Sure. Well, Getting Groomed, the inspiration came when same-sex marriage was still going state by state, and it legalized in New York, where I live. And there was such a boom as to what everybody in the events and hospitality industry was talking about, how much business we were to expect for the same-sex couples that were going to start getting married. And I realized that there was just such a void of a book like this specifically for gay couples. And then when I got the book deal, I pitched it as a book specifically for men, and actually had this conversation with my publishing house where they said, well, why don't you make it for all same-sex couples? So that way you sort of double the market, you don't alienate. And my feeling was that in doing that, you sort of make a more generic version of the book, because two women getting married don't have the same experience as two men. And if you were a straight bride who was looking for a wedding planning book, you have more than 100 options to choose from. If you browse on Amazon, or back then you could go into a Barnes and Noble and see things, for a modern bride, a green bride, a classic bride. There were just so many iterations of this. And I remember making the case to my publishing house that just saying, I think we've earned our own book. And I don't think it's right to make the men sift through pages that are about dresses or white pantsuits, and similarly that women who are marrying other women want to necessarily read about some of the things that are uniquely male. And so that's why I made the choice to write it specifically for men. Mm-hmm. And there was always an idea at the time that, potentially I would maybe co-author a book for women with somebody else. But then my career in wedding planning just sort of took off, and the next book has not come yet. But we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. But in terms of the language, one of the biggest differences is when I first had the idea to write the book. It was a very exciting time from getting the book deal to about 2 years later when it finally came out, because it felt like this domino effect after New York State legalized same-sex marriage, and so many other states followed suit. But I certainly never dreamed that it would be legal in all 50 states in this country. I never saw this happening in, the super conservative states that don't seem to be overly progressive on social issues. So when the federal ruling came about 2 years after that, I was shocked. And that's where some of the language of the book is a bit outdated, because I talked to certain couples that if you live in a state that doesn't recognize marriage, perhaps you want to still declare your love in front of family and friends and have what was known as a commitment ceremony, which was a very common, term used back then. So that would be the next place to really update things. And where I feel the book has aged is when I was writing it, I certainly, and I think many, never was quite predicted just how social media would become so integrated into every single thing that we do. And now, I go through all of that with my couples, from, whether it's deciding the wedding hashtag or making a conscious choice to ask people to turn off their phones during a wedding. And so, none of that is in the book. So that is certainly a place where if I do a volume 2, that I would make a lot of updates.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, because I hadn't really thought of the technology aspect and how that could be such an integral part or intentionally left out of the experience. Maybe we can explore that a little bit when we look at some of the couples we're going to talk about. Sure. Well, I wanted to ask you, since you created the book, which is sort of like a planning guide, and now you're sort of like deep into it along with your team. I'm curious what it's like working with vendors, which is a huge part of this planning process, and sort of what your vetting process is to ensure that you're working with LGBTQ plus affirmative and supportive partners, because you're doing weddings all over the country, if not all over the world, actually.
Correct. It's more challenging when we work outside of our region. Thankfully, my 2 home bases of New York and Los Angeles seem to have very pro LGBTQ vendors here. But for the amount of years that I've been doing this now, it still amazes me how many times that I correct people. Just this Saturday night, we were setting up the venue that I had 2 brides getting married on Saturday night, and I was going over the floor plan with the catering manager, and she pointed to the table for 2, and she goes, for the bride and groom. I said, you have 2 brides here tonight. And it's just, sometimes I don't think vendors do it intentionally. They're just on autopilot, but I always go out of my way to correct them in that moment, because that is a very offensive thing to hear if you're the couple that's getting married. There have been so many times where I've, sent, vendors that I recommend, like for photography or videography or whatever it might be. And my clients decide which one they like from my sort of short list, and I ask for a contract, and then it comes back and it says something like, fill out bride's name and groom's name. And I always, I don't let my clients see that when I, if I catch it first, and I say this needs to be revised. And also, just FYI, if you put partner 1 and partner 2 or spouse 1, like, it just saves you from going through this for other people who don't identify with those.
There's still a lot of education to be had, and it's interesting to think that you're sort of a mediator of that. And there's probably, as you indicated, a lot of touch points that the brides or grooms, or however they are identifying themselves, might not even see. It's almost like this little safety net that exists.
Yeah, and despite all the not only the achievements we've made, from like in terms of our rights, but I mean the how many more same-sex weddings have happened in the past decade. It is still such an industry that is very heteronormative and truly caters to brides more than anything else, and that just has not changed.
Well, you're changing it because you've done a lot of groom couples, which we're going to show in a bit. I'm curious. So I spent some time on your website, and there's several tiers of options in terms of how engaged the couple wants to be, or how hands-on. I don't know. I imagine everyone sort of thinks about this day in very different ways. I know you did some shifts throughout the pandemic doing things virtually, but I think, looking ahead and moving forward, I'm more curious about how people are engaging with you and your team sort of for real in-person events. I'm curious at what level your average couple comes in. Do they want a complete takeover? Do they want to be hands-on? Is there any sort of running theme among them, or is it really a case-by-case basis?
It's a case-by-case basis, which is why, like, on my website, I sort of have it broken out into to different types of services. But as I tell every couple that I meet with for the first time, whether it's in person, on a phone call, or over Zoom, all of my packages are put together on a custom basis, because no couple is the same. And I take great pride in that none of my weddings are the same. And so the experience and the needs are very, very different. But I range from couples coming to me having literally nothing decided, including when they want to get married and the type of venue, and kind of them needing the help ironing out those details so we can focus on the process of selecting a venue and getting a date and moving on from there, versus some couples that say, we booked our venue and now we want you to help with everything else. Or people that come to me and they say, we've done all this and we thought we could do it on our own, and now we're in complete overwhelm and we have everything booked, but we don't know how to get to the finish line. And so I kind of enjoy the variety of it all. I love being involved from the beginning, because it gives us the utmost control for smooth planning. It's more challenging sometimes to jump in and take over for people who aren't necessarily of planning mindsets, and just because they book things, they don't totally understand their contracts, or they don't look at really like the scheduling of things. And so we end up having to sort of do some more work on that end to make things go smoothly, but that is all part of our job, so it's what we do.
Yeah, I could be doing some catch up. Well, to that point, as we continue to chat, I admit I rated your photo galleries, and I wanted to highlight a few.
I'm not offended. I'm honored.
Yeah. Oh my God. I don't even know that I really want to get married, but after watching so many of these, or looking at them, I sort of kind of feel like I do. So some of these pique my interest. They're all gorgeous, but I thought it'd be fun to look at some examples and talk about how these dreams kind of became a reality. So we're just going to use first names. We don't know, but the couples have granted, use of the photos. So this is Michael and Andy. It looks like a slumber party. I think this was in the UK, right? So what's happening here?
That's correct. So Michael and Andy were a New York-based couple that wanted to get married at the place that they got engaged at, which is in the countryside of England. But the majority of their friends were coming from various places in the United States. But we had the venue essentially for a day, and everyone stayed on site. And so the idea was to really make the most of that day. And we divided the wedding into 3 distinct sections that we had also. The idea was that each time a couple went to their room, a surprise was waiting for them. And so the ceremony, which was in this little chapel that they have on site, followed by cocktail hour, was like English garden party chic. And then everybody went back to their room to change for dinner, which was much more sort of Downton Abbey inspired and super formal.
Right.
and we had little gifts waiting for them as they changed into their tuxes and gowns. And then they came down for dinner and for a bit of dancing after dinner. And then they went back to their rooms for the final surprise, which is when they found these matching onesies that photo was for. And so the last phase of the night was everybody in their onesies, and we lit a fire and people were playing guitar and really just having a lot of fun. So it was a wedding in 3 acts for a theater couple.
Yeah. So they are theater people, and I imagine many of the attendees sort of had a theatrical background. You alluded to this at the start of our conversation that you have a playwriting background, and we've talked about how these events really are storytelling, kind of having high points, and I don't know, it's just so fascinating. Do you really think of it sort of in that way, as sort of creating like an arc, whether it's just the evening, or I don't know, or do you also plan sort of like the whole weekend in terms of a traditional rehearsal dinner, or like that brunch that you have on Sunday before everybody goes back to wherever they're from? Do you do the whole shebang sometimes?
Yeah, I do it often. And then I often have the conversations with couples who say something like, I loathe when I'm a guest and I have to go to one of those brunches at a hotel at the end, so we don't want to have that. But that's part of the process, is really talking through where some of these traditions came from, and letting a couple know that it is your wedding and you have permission to do things your way. And that's really what makes the wedding the most successful. So I have a lot of fun unpacking all the traditions with people to get them to make really conscious choices about what it is that's going to make, whether it's just the wedding day or the wedding weekend, feel the most like them. And that's really where the storytelling part comes into it. I remind every couple that really the only thing you have to do to get married is sign the marriage license. The rest is pomp, circumstance, and tradition. And it's about walking couples through, if they don't know, where some of it came from, and asking questions like, so what is it that you love when you're at other weddings, and what is it that you don't like? And there really are no rules. And honestly, you're never going to please everyone. And it's just more important that you look back and say, we did things our way. Now, I don't say that like you want to offend your guests, or you want to really ruffle the feathers with like close family, and things like that. I mean, there is compromising that goes along the way, especially if you're getting financial contributions from people. But the weddings that are the most successful are those that uniquely feel like the couple. And that's always my goal. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews where people will say something like, what is a signature Jason Mitchell Kahn wedding? And it's really not about me. I mean, I work to make it happen, but like the couple that I just had on Sunday night, they were named Molly and Dan. And so many of their guests came up to me as they were leaving at the end of the night being like, this night was so Molly and Dan. And that's, for me, is always the goal.
Yeah. Someone watching just said, love these photos, triple exclamation points, want to get married now. So one of the weddings I saw that really just kind of wowed me was Michelle and Sydney, this outdoor wedding, which it sort of freaks me out, because I just feel like there's just the elements of nature on top of everything else that can, happen, I suppose.
I will say it is very refreshing to me when clients are doing a completely indoor wedding and we don't have to walk through the plan A and plan B of what will happen if weather is not on our side. And they were really just this amazing example of, this was in Greenville, South Carolina. And looking at the forecast a week out, we had like it looked like it was going to just be a stunning day with no chance of rain. And we had a rain tent on hold. That we canceled at that point. And then by about Wednesday of that week, the forecast was shifting and the percentage of rain was up to like 20%, which is a relatively low percentage. But I talked it through with them. I said, we canceled the tent. I can call the company and see what they can do. But at this point, you'd have to pay in full. And they said, well, if that guarantees that we have 100% chance of having our wedding, it is well worth it. And as it turned out, it poured that morning. And the sun came out about an hour before that ceremony, which allowed us to have it where it was. So it also kind of felt like a very meant to be moment from Mother Nature. But we would have really been not in good shape had we not had that tent.
Yeah, it looked just absolutely gorgeous. Sort of this, it looked like it was on some kind of estate, perhaps, or what was the?
It's currently a hotel, but it was a former vineyard, and it's a beautiful. I mean, it really takes you to like, somewhere in Provence, much more than Greenville, South Carolina, in terms of the design of the property. And it was really fun. It's about an 18-room boutique hotel. So the two of them and all of their bridal parties stayed there and like really took over the hotel, and they had the whole thing to themselves. And so, I mean, I was there setting up at like, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning that Saturday. And by that point, the girls were already starting hair and makeup, and it was just really fun. It doesn't always work out that way where I can be that close to it. And so it was fun to be able to check on them throughout the day and see how all that was going. And they're two women that are beautiful from the inside and out, and also really wanted to put their statement as wherever they could. And so, for instance, there's like a giant piece of art typically when you walk into the foyer of the hotel, which is where a cocktail hour would be, that we took down and replaced with a piece of art from their home, which was the statement made by the former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the ruling on same-sex marriage. And so it was all about setting the tone for people that came into that how much that meant to the two women that they were there and able to get married.
Yeah. Yeah. I also noticed from that last photo, lighting is very important. Like regardless of everything else that's going on,
100%.
Lighting can make a huge difference, especially for that wow factor. I know rituals are a huge part of different couples' wedding plans. I wanted to look at Mark and Uday's wedding, which has some interesting things that were going on as well. What was there? Where was that wedding at, and what was the experience?
That was in London, and they were there were a couple that lives in London, but Mark is Australian, originally from Australia. And why Uday was born in London, his family is of Indian background. And so it was all about merging these two backgrounds to make their gay wedding happen in London. And so they got married during the ceremony in the traditional Indian garb here. And then later they changed into their Alexander McQueen tuxedos for the dinner and the dancing part. But it was really about making it feel like them, and while also honoring their families and their backgrounds.
Yeah, that venue is absolutely gorgeous.
It was a fun one to work at. It was a beautiful, it came, I tell couples as well, we can do whatever when it comes to decor. I mean, if the budget is there, we can build out anything that is needed. But it's when a place inherently feels like what you want it to be like for the wedding, and we don't have as much of a lift, and then we're just sort of accentuating it and lighting it and adding things, it creates something like that. I mean, the architecture of that space is so spectacular as it is.
Yeah, it was absolutely beautiful. Sometimes it's not just sort of the artifacts or the pieces or the architecture that contribute to the experience, but it's the actual experience itself. So Larry and Mark, which is another wedding we're going to look at, looked like there was some sort of traditional dance performance or something that happened at their wedding. I'm curious where that wedding was and what was sort of happening. I mean, that's just so gorgeous. Everyone's just in black and white. It's so sexy.
Yeah, and this is so Mark and Larry got married in Los Angeles, and they and Larry is Jewish, and Mark comes from a Filipino background, but they also go to the super progressive church that's in Pasadena. So the ceremony was actually in a church, and they got married in barongs, which is typical Filipino dress for a wedding, and then changed into, they had a Vanity Fair inspired wedding party, which was that black and white photo, and then these were friends of Mark's, but also people that he was once in a dance troupe with when he was younger, that surprised him with this traditional dance from their dancing days.
And it looks like such a great time. And I love the whole black and white theme. I don't know. I mean, I've never even, this is crazy to think about, but I feel like gay men of a certain age, I don't know, like I never even really thought about getting married. And now, of course, we've had same-sex marriage legal for, a number of years in the US, but I feel like mentally I'm still catching up. Oh, that's a beautiful.
Oh yeah, that's them in their barongs at the church.
Yeah, they just look so gorgeous. So in addition to all of these layers of planning and couples and tradition and venue, you've worked with a lot of celebrities. One event that you did earlier this fall was helping to plan a teen beach movie and King Cobra star Garrett Clayton's wedding to his partner and now husband, Blake Knight. That was an exclusive photo shoot with People magazine. I'm curious how the celebrity angle plays into the complexities of everything else, I guess, in terms of security and paparazzi, or maybe that's more in LA than New York. I don't know. What have you had to deal with juggling that on top of everything else?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I did a wedding a few years before this one in Los Angeles. That was for the nephew of Mariah Carey, and so she was going to be in attendance at the wedding,
Mm,
even though she wasn't getting married. But I
yeah.
mean, just that week alone, I had like 4 walkthroughs with her security team to point out every entrance and exit point at the hotel because they're doing their job to make sure she's safe. So that's an extra layer that goes into the planning when you're dealing with that. And I've also had celebrities like in New York who are very famous in the Broadway scene who have said to me like, our fans are harmless. I mean, they're like teenagers who are obsessed with our work, but we don't want them crashing the wedding.
Yes.
So in that case, we make sure we'll say something to guests like, please don't post until the wedding is over, because one Instagram post tagging the location and who's there, on all of a sudden these people could start to show up. But Garrett and Blake's was a wonderful wedding to get to be a part of. In terms of the celebrity layer, what I've always found in working with these people and being fortunate enough to have done this a few times is when it's time for them to get married, I mean, there is nothing that's celebrity about it. I mean, it's their special day, and I treat all of my clients, whether they're famous or not, like VIPs, and that day is super important. So in our relationship, nothing feels different in the process. I just know there's a couple other things that we're going to talk about, like security, and
Right.
in this case, because we had the exclusive with People Magazine, making sure that nobody posted until people could display their photos.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we let you go,
Well, I'm so fast.
I know, I feel like we could just keep talking and talking and talking. And there's so many more weddings that you've done that are each unique in their own special way.
Well, we
But
can always do this again, Matthew.
I know we can. I'm curious, these are spectacular affairs, and I'm sure many of them are sort of big dollar events. But for people who are watching who are like, oh, I want to do something special, but I don't have 6 figures to spend on my wedding. What are there any little hacks or ideas that you've used, even regardless of the budget, that are just ways that you can sort of create a special moment that aren't necessarily super, super expensive?
Yeah, I mean, often what I say to people, even the people spending the money, in that top tier, is that some of the most memorable moments at our wedding are often ones that don't cost anything. And that is really what makes the impact. It's how you make people feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so rare that what you as a guest, when you rave about a wedding that you attended, are really talking about the flowers or the food that you were served or things like that. It's really about how the couple and the overall experience carried you emotionally through the night. So much of that is being very conscious about the ceremony, because the rest of it is in celebration of the ceremony, and the tone is set there. And it doesn't mean it has to be a super serious or emotional ceremony, but it needs to be reflective of the couple. So I mean, I've had some ceremonies that they could be like comedy shows. They're so funny because the couple is like that, and the officiant does a good job honoring that. And when you highlight for people, particularly in same-sex weddings, that this whole idea of marriage is still relatively new, and that it's really within the past decade that we're seeing this in this country, I always see the people in the audience connecting the dots, the straight people realizing just how profound this is, and how different a matter of 10 years makes for people. And when you see them make that connection, that is often one of the biggest things they take from the wedding. There's so much that you can do in showing that you care for your guests that does not cost a lot of money. When you have not huge guest counts, giving people a handwritten note of your appreciation rather than just an escort card is something that means the world to people. Mm-hmm. Doing one of the weddings that we did, the Michael and Andy's wedding that we had up earlier, when we brought everyone downstairs for the second part, which was for dinner, before we went into the dining room, everybody stood in a circle. It was about 80 guests, and they took their rings back off and they passed them in opposing directions throughout the circle. So every single guest could take a moment to hold each couple's ring and sort of, put a wish or whatever they wanted to on it before it reached them, and they put them back on. And so many people told me that moment when we were all standing out there was one of the most special things they've ever experienced at a wedding. And again, literally cost no money to do. It was just having the thought that this would be something important for them to share with their guests.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep that in mind if I get married. Remind me when I call you for I haven't even had a date, but if and when I get engaged and then get married, I know you're the person I'm going to call.
Well, thank you. I'd be offended if you went elsewhere, Matt.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason, for taking some time out of I'm sure you're already planning the next weekend and recovering from the last weekend. So it was great having you on.
You nailed the description of it.
Right. Thank you. It's great seeing you, and I hope our paths cross again soon.
Me too. Have a great
Awesome.
one.
Thank you. From weddings to honeymoons to gift giving to a long overdue vacation, there is so much coming up on Edge this holiday season that you don't want to miss, including our exclusive gift guides that are launching later this month, as well as our anticipated 7 Queer Wonders of the World, which is our Where to Travel in 2022 list. I hope you'll be checking that out. Of course, you can always tune in to edgemedianetwork.com for all the latest news. Follow us on social media to see those breaking stories first, along with our new Fast 5 video series, a quick 1-minute snapshot of the week's hottest stories. Until then, I am Matthew Wexler, encouraging you to live on the edge.